Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. Today's video will be a compilation of some of my favorite scary stories that I've recorded over the past few months. So if you're new to the channel, you'll enjoy these videos because they will be new to you. But if you're here on a regular basis, you probably have heard most of these stories already. I'm going to do some Q&A answering before this video starts as well, because I know you guys have waited long enough for those. So here goes nothing. First question I'm going to answer goes to Gordon Searles. He asked, do you listen to horror stories from other channels? If yes, who? I've been listening for 3 going on 4 years now. Obviously, I've heard of Mr. Nightmare, Corpse Husband, Unit 522. Mortis Media is one of my faves as well. I've worked with several narrators. I've worked with Killer Orange Cat, who's a great guy, great human being. Mortis Media is a good friend of mine. He's an incredible guy to work with. Unit 522 was a pleasure. I've worked with him 2 or 3 different times. I worked with King Spook one time as well. King Spook, to be absolutely honest, is probably my number 1. Unit 522 is, I would say, my number 2. Mortis is my number 3. And the list kind of goes Lazy, Masquerade from there. There's some top narrators. I don't want to out anyone right now. I don't want to play favorites, so hope that answers your question, Gordon. Thanks for watching, my dude. Vernell Smith asks, how did you get started doing creepy narration? Honestly, I've always been interested in doing radio or narrating of some kind. Ever since I was a young kid, my voice really got super deep. I kind of wanted to do something kind of related to this field. I'm really glad that all of you guys enjoy listening so much because it's turning into a part-time job and maybe eventually it'll turn into a full-time gig. And Vernell does ask, do I have any pets? I do. I have 2 cats, Mittens and Waffles. Waffles has the polydactyl claws, so Home Dude can legit give you a high five. He can wrap his little thumbs around you and hold you like a person. And I live in Vancouver, Washington, an exciting place. So Sarah Z asked as well where I was from the U.S., Vancouver, Washington. Again, looks like you live in Australia, which is really cool. It's one place I'd love to go visit someday. I love your guys' accents too. So shout out to you. Thank you for watching. Next one, just scrolling down here. M. Lee QS asks, have I been drawn to these type of stories and why? I've always honestly enjoyed true crime. Serial killer cases are always kind of fascinating to see the science behind things and how they're solved. I honestly just enjoy a good scare, so I like to put myself into situations in my mind. Basically, what would I do if somebody broke into my house? How would I react? How would I respond in that moment of truth? So I've always been interested in that side of it as well. Next question. How I came up with Sinful's Horror Stories. Originally, if you guys have been listening long enough, it was the Sinful Savant. I wanted to go with a name that was edgy and also kind of different. When you think about sinful, you think about living a life of sin, living a life of excess, kind of pushing close to the edge with what you do and how you live, doing dark shit, basically stuff like that. And then a savant, on the other hand, is a well-spoken, well-read, highly intelligent person that is well-versed in the ways of the world. So I kind of combine those two. To be honest, the only reason I changed my name from Savant to Horror Stories with the Sinful was because I thought it would get more action on the YouTube. So thought maybe more people would respond and relate to it. Next question. I promise we'll get to the compilation here shortly. I know in the comment section you guys have really been wanting to know more about me. So next question. Jack Linney 32 asks, have I done a face reveal? I have not done a face reveal on my YouTube in actual video, but if you follow me on Instagram and Twitter under Sinful's Horror Stories, which is Instagram's handle, and then on my Twitter, I'm at Sinful Savant. You can see several pictures of me there, so check that out. Laura Metheny asks, are you really that sinful? I'd have to say yes, I am very sinful. Shit, I am sinful, right? I'm the guy. I'm the one you call sinful. So I try to live a good, just life, but sinning is good too. We're all human. So Laura, thanks for always watching. I know you've been supporting the channel for 3 years now, so much love there. Next one. Hold on. Nicholas Ducharme asks, what's your favorite type of horror story? Favorite type of horror story for me has to be either home invasion or deep woods. Anything outdoors can be extra spooky and extra creepy. So thanks, brother. If you want to share what your favorite type of horror story is, drop that comment in the comment section below. Next one. Little James Girl asks, what advice do you have for aspiring narrators? To be honest, just be yourself. Try to find a way that you can narrate that is comfortable and in a way that suits you and your voice and your personality. The way I narrate, I just try to kind of go slow, steady, methodical with my narration. I change my voice a little bit to sound a little more kind of just dark and creepy, but honestly, it's just all personal preference. I would say find stories that you enjoy narrating, find a topic or find a theme for your channel, and then go with it. If you don't enjoy doing it and it doesn't give you some sort of feeling of joy and I would say accomplishment, then don't even bother. If you're just coming up, just keep narrating. The more videos you put out, the more subscribers you will get. It's just a numbers game, honestly. So, thank you. Next one. Michelle Graham asks, what made you decide to create a horror-based channel? To be honest, I love listening to horror stories, the true scary vibe. I really just wanted to make a few extra bucks, and it's something that I always wanted to do, which is read and narrate. A lot of people told me growing up that maybe I had a good voice for narrating, radio, or maybe even singing, so I figured why not do something totally different. Haunted Girl asks, have you ever lived in, been to, or experienced anything paranormal? I honestly have to say no. I've been lucky enough in that respect. I've never had any issue with the paranormal, never been witness to any of it, so I would consider myself lucky because obviously demons, paranormal entities, they all do exist. Where there is good, there is evil. So, next question from Haunted Girl. Would you ever do an interview with someone that could verbally share some of the most scary and unexplainable paranormal tales with you, and then you could narrate them? That sounds like a great idea, to be honest with you. Let's maybe connect on this further and email back and forth, and let's put some ideas together for a video. I like that. Next one. Looks like the most asked question is, what is one true scary thing that has happened to me, or what is the most horrifying story or experience I have to share? To answer that question, you're going to have to wait for the next video. Be sure to like this video, comment, share, subscribe for more, and enjoy this compilation of some of the scariest stories I've ever narrated. Let's begin. This story takes place in England. My name is Eric. I'm a 25-year-old male. One evening I was scrolling through my Facebook when a woman called Anya messaged me saying hello. I didn't know who she was, and I usually don't reply to strangers, but she was pretty attractive, so I thought, why not? And I decided to message her back saying hi. Some time had passed and we ended up talking all night. We got along so well. She was very nice and seemed to be into the same things as I was. I'm a metalhead and into dark gothic stuff, and she was the same. That same night she asked me if I wanted to go to her house. That same night she asked me if I wanted to go to her house the next night to listen to music and watch some movies, just hang out and that sort of stuff. It seemed very sudden, I know, but I thought we got along so well. I don't have anything planned and she was only 20 minutes drive away. We traded phone numbers and then the following night I got myself ready and drove to her address. The house she lived in was out in the country and a little further than I had anticipated. When I finally arrived, I saw the home. It was a big country house from the outside and was very beautiful, to be honest. I also noticed there were 3 cars in the driveway. I thought that was odd because she told me she lived alone, but maybe she just owned more cars. I messaged Anya letting her know that I had arrived. She replied telling me to just come in and go upstairs and proceed into the bedroom. That was strange that she wouldn't just meet me at the door. When I entered the house, the place was so dark it hadn't been cleaned or maintained in years. Had a weird, unpleasant old smell. I then proceeded to head upstairs, the old creaky, dusty stairs. I spoke out saying, "Anya, "Where are you?" A voice called out from one of the rooms saying, "In here." The voice sounded older than I expected. It was more like an elderly lady. I entered one of the bedrooms from where the voice came from. I was horrified from what I saw next. Standing in front of me was a naked old lady who looked like she had blood smeared all over her, and two men standing next to her wearing black robes and cow skulls on their head, some kind of mask. My heart stopped. I was in pure shock and I couldn't breathe. The lady stepped to the side and she revealed a goat whose throat had been slit and drained of blood. She spoke and said, "You're our next sacrifice to the Lord Satan himself." The two men began to approach me. I turned around and sprinted as fast as I could. They chased me down the stairs. I flung the front door open and one of the men tackled me to the floor just as we got outside. I wrestled with him, trying to punch him and get him off of me, which I did after a short struggle. I got up, dashed to my car. The man then ran up to my car, started banging on the window, trying to open the door. I quickly started the car and began to drive away as soon as I started accelerating. I saw the second man a few meters away in front of my car. He obviously anticipated my escape and tried to stop me. I slammed on my brakes, and the man who tackled me ran up behind my car, smashed the back window in my car. At that point, I just slammed on the accelerator and hit the guy who was trying to block my way, running him over. I had no choice otherwise. My life would have been over. I drove as fast as I could home. I never told anyone about what happened. And I sure as hell don't use social media anymore. Story number 2. My name is James. I'm a 16-year-old male. One evening I was playing some Black Ops 4 on my PS4. I was having a good night, getting lots of kills and enjoying myself. I came across this one guy whose online ID was Killer Ken 663. I kept killing him over and over, and as he had a headset on, I could hear him shouting and swearing every time I killed him, which I found pretty funny. He stayed in my lobby for about 4 games or so, each time getting more angry and upset. I was finding it funnier though each time. After about the 4th game of destroying him, he spoke in the lobby before the next match and said, "God damn it, that stupid kid keeps killing me." I sat there laughing, but all that changed when the next words he spoke were, "I bet you find this really funny, don't you, James?" I immediately stopped laughing and my heart sank. My eyes opened wide. I was so shocked. How did he know my name? It's not possible. My online ID is COD122. There's no way he could know my real name. Immediately I left the lobby. I sat there at my desk for a few moments, pretty freaked out. I took a breath and calmed down a bit. I thought maybe he meant someone else, and I was getting confused with another guy called James in the lobby or something, and it was just a coincidence. About 5 minutes passed and I carried on playing and tried to forget about it. I was starting to enjoy playing again. In the game I was playing, I noticed in the kills feed, it said Killer Ken 663 connected. I was thinking, no way, not this guy again. I was still pretty weirded out, so I left the match. After finding another lobby, I was waiting for the game to start, and once again Killer Ken 663 popped up. I quickly left and went to look for a new game this time. Before I even searched for the game, I was the only one in the game that he joined. I sat there in complete and utter fear. He got on his mic and said, "Fucking die in hell, James, and I'm going to be the one to send you there." I instantly backed out and was scared as hell. What is wrong with this psycho? I blocked him, thinking he must have just kept joining by going on recent players, annoyed with myself as that was the first thing I should have thought to do. I decided to stop playing that night as I was frightened by this crazy man threatening me. The next day when I turned on my PlayStation, I received a message. It was him, Killer Ken 663. The message read, "See you soon, James." This was 3 weeks ago. I haven't had any other incidences with this guy since, and I certainly hope it stays that way. I'm a female whose name is Allison. This story happened when I was 17. I was walking home late one night after finishing my shift at the store I work at. After about 5 minutes of walking, a car pulled up beside me. It was a police car. I thought I was in some kind of trouble. A policeman then got out of the car and said, "Can I give you a lift home?" I wouldn't usually get into a stranger's car, but as it was a policeman, I assumed it would be safe. And the neighborhood I lived in at the time wasn't the nicest, and had a high crime rate. I took him up on his offer, got in his car, gave my address, and then he started driving. He was very overweight, had a mustache and a mole on his left cheek. The first few minutes of the car ride were pretty awkward, as he nor I didn't say anything, until he spoke up and said, "Lucky I picked you up when I did. All sorts of young women like yourself get assaulted around here, allegedly." And then he chuckled. I thought that's a strange thing to say, and even found it amusing, especially for a cop. Right after that he said, "But I got you safe in my hands, so don't you worry." As he said this, he placed his hand on my thigh, giving a small chuckle once again. His fingernails were long and broken and really disgusting. I awkwardly smiled and chuckled with him. I was feeling very uncomfortable at this point. He removed his hand and put it back on the steering wheel. I just looked outside the window, regretting my decision to get into his car. A few moments go by until he spoke again. "Do you work out? Those are some nice firm legs you have." To which I replied, Sometimes when I can." He said nothing, just carried on driving. At this point I noticed we had been driving longer than we should have. I didn't say anything as I was too nervous and thought maybe he was just taking a different route than usual to my house. He then said, "Must be tiring." I replied with a slight stutter, "What's tiring?" A short pause before he said, "To work out and have nice firm legs like that. I think you need a nice rub down." At this point I was really freaked out and thought my life was now in danger. I then tried to pull my phone out of my bag to call my boyfriend, but as soon as I put my hand in my bag he screamed, "Don't even think about it." He snatched my bag and threw it out the window. I was thinking I'm going to be killed, and I started to cry. He then proceeded to pull into a secluded parking lot and park the car. I was too scared to move. He just sat there, looking down at the steering wheel, breathing heavily. Then he got out of the car and opened up the trunk. I quickly jumped across the driver's side seat and flung the door open. The man rushed back from the trunk and was there to intercept me. He grabbed my arm and tried to pull me back into the car. I bit his hand as hard as I could and screamed, "Let go!" I ran away as fast as I could, not looking back. I heard his car start and the tires screech, driving off fast. I ran and hid in a nearby forest. I hid for what felt like hours, till I could see the distant headlights of the police car patrolling the area. Thankfully, he gave up and never found me, and eventually drove off. I gathered up some courage and ran all the way home. I only told my parents and boyfriend about the incident. I don't trust the police anymore, and certainly don't walk home alone at night. This happened just a few hours ago at 2 a.m. I live in an apartment complex downtown, and it's also filled with lots of university students, but the building also houses many of the non-university students on the top floor where the penthouses are located. A little bit of background information. I'm sort of a manager-resident advisor for the uni students that live in the building. There are 3 of us, and someone is on call every night with a central on-call phone to deal with any issues that students may have. I woke up at 2:20 a.m. to someone knocking on my door. I use knocking loosely here, as a person was kicking, pounding, and body slamming my door while trying to use the keypad to key in over and over again. I quietly looked out my peephole and saw a man who seemed under the influence. At the time, I was terrified that things would get worse if he knew I was home. so I tried to be as quiet as possible. I grabbed a kitchen knife for reassurance. Then I went to my room and started calling the person on call to help me, but he wasn't picking up. I called the person above him and told them the situation, but they weren't sure what to do and thought maybe we had to call the city police. But she said she would call around and then call me back immediately. I would have immediately called the police, but the last 3 times I've called them for other issues, as an RA here, I've had to go down and then badge them into the building. I was terrified of having to unlock my door and go out. I decided to start calling everyone else I knew in the building. Number 1, to get someone to see what the fuck was going on from the other side. And number 2, to get someone to open the building door for the police if I were to call them. I called my friends and the other community manager RAs, my supervisor, but no one was picking up. The person on area duty finally calls me back and says the higher-ups just want to have an extra set of eyes on the situation. But she doesn't have a car, so she wants me to wait until she can call an Uber. I'm terrified at this point and go back into my living room and see that the bottom left corner of my door has been kicked in, and the only thing keeping it from opening is the deadbolt. It's 2:52 a.m. now, and the guy's pounding and trying to key in stops. So I look out my peephole and see one of my residents down the hall talking to this guy for 5 minutes before leaving in the elevator. I wait a minute or two and then come out of my apartment to go knock on the RA's door. He told me he was just about to write me a note because he thought I was probably inside terrified. He apparently came out because the pounding was so loud, reverberating, that he thought someone was at his door. The guy was trying to get into his girlfriend's apartment and didn't have his phone on him. Additionally, the passcode his girlfriend gave him wasn't working. My resident let him borrow his phone to call his girlfriend. Turns out she's directly a floor above me. The resident was always a super nice guy and gave me his number in case anything ever happens in the future. I take a look at my door and it's almost falling off the bottom 2 hinges. Considering this went on for 40 minutes, I can see why my door is in such bad shape. But also, who does this? Even if you're drunk and you thought it was your girlfriend's apartment, why would you try to break down the door to get in? The RA manager on duty finally comes over to my apartment at 3 a.m. after duty finally got in touch with them. I filled them in and we went upstairs to talk to this guy. The girlfriend opens the door, asks us what we want, and after asking to talk to her boyfriend, she's pretty adamant about not wanting to wake him up because he's tired. Okay. I show her the photos of the damage and she's pretty upset, so she tries waking him up to no avail, but we were pretty clear that we weren't leaving until we got to talk to him. He finally gets up and apologizes because he had the wrong door. I showed him the photos and he denies that he caused the damage, saying he only knocked softly. His girlfriend in the back seemed pretty upset and disappointed in him, and he snapped at her saying, "Well, what was I supposed to do? I didn't have my phone and you didn't pick up earlier." Apparently they just moved in on Sunday, and he didn't remember where the room was. The person on duty and I asked to see his ID, and asked if we could take a picture, which he agreed to. We left and I filed a maintenance request for the door, wrote an email to my boss and the leasing manager, and also called the police to file the report. The police came. I let them into my building, showed them the damage and explained everything. They said it was probably an honest mistake and just gave me a case number to give to the leasing manager so that they can bill for potential damage. I asked if they could give me an update afterwards, mostly for my sanity and reassurance, but they said it was unnecessary and there wasn't really anything else I needed to know. It was a terrifying experience and I'm glad I'm alive, because I thought I was honestly going to die. This had me pretty shook, and I usually would have been up at 2 in the morning, but I'm trying to go to sleep earlier, because I'm taking the MCAT on Saturday. I'm trying to do some last-minute studying while I wait for someone to come fix my door. In retrospect, I'm pretty worried for the girlfriend upstairs, because the guy wasn't exhibiting normal behavior, even for someone that's intoxicated. I'm going to be extra cognizant of noises from upstairs, and I'll call someone if it sounds like there's any instances of domestic violence or abuse. My name is Mark and I'm 58 years old, and this story happened 20 years ago. I used to be a truck driver working the night shifts. I did that for about 7 years and enjoyed it for the most part. The pay was good and I liked the quiet time that I got to myself. One night I was driving listening to the radio and drinking coffee like I usually do. It was really dark on the secluded roads I was driving on, with no street lamps around. All I could see were my own headlights and the road it lit up. It was also pouring down rain. I came across a car that was pulled over to the side of the road, and two men who then ran into the forest, leaving the car doors open. I don't know why, but something made me stop and pull over as soon as I drove past. I turned my radio off and thought about what I just saw and what I should do. After some thought, it did look odd, so I decided to check it out. I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the road towards the car. When I got there, I couldn't see anyone around. I spoke out and said, "Hello? Anyone there?" I shined my light in the car and had a look inside. The car was on and the keys were in the ignition. I mumbled to myself, What's going on here? Just as I said that, I heard a branch snap in the woods. "Hello? Who's there?" No answer. I called out again. "Is anyone there? Are you hurt?" I was starting to think I shouldn't be here. Whoever those men were who ran off clearly didn't want me to know something and didn't need any help. I turned around, about to jog back to my truck, when I heard a bump. I stopped and listened. I heard it again. It was coming from the trunk of the car. I tried to open it, but it was locked. I needed the keys. I quickly got them out of the ignition and opened the trunk, and I couldn't believe what I saw. There was a woman who was gagged and tied up. She was bleeding on her forehead and tears streaming down her face. I removed the cloth from her mouth and she was begging me to help her. Before I could do anything, the two men ran out of the trees and attacked me. One of them hit me really hard on my knee with a crowbar, and I dropped to the floor screaming in pain, whilst the other one hit me with a bat on my legs a few times to make sure I wasn't getting up. They both ran into the car, slammed shut the trunk, and drove off. That whole time I could hear the woman screaming for help. I tried to get up, but I was in too much pain and I couldn't stand. I managed to crawl back inside my truck and radio for help. I told police what happened. That woman was never seen again. Story number 2. I was driving home one night, as I had not seen my family for 2 weeks. Filled with excitement, I decided to take a shortcut through a desolated area that I didn't know too well. I had heard stories through the scanner about it, mostly ghost tales. And I do, as a matter of fact, believe in ghosts, but my eagerness to surprise my wife and kids got the best of me. It was 3:40 a.m. or so in the morning, and I had been on that particular road for about an hour already. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened yet. Suddenly, I get to an area packed with old creepy trees on the side and tons of shrubbery. As usual, my radio was on, and out of nowhere the horrible static starts crackling through the speakers. I started to feel chilly and uncomfortable when, wouldn't you know, I saw a man hanging from a tree on the side of the road. There he was. His body was even swinging from side to side. I stepped on the brake as fast and as carefully as I could, but I kept looking through the rear view mirror, and he was still there. I grabbed my coat, my gun, and my flashlight, and I had my phone in my pocket, and I started to dial 911. But there was no signal. I made my way through the shrubs, and when I reached the tree, he was gone. I moved the flashlight around thinking maybe he had gotten free. I went back to my truck, looked back, and there he was again, hanging like I had seen him before. After this, let's just say I didn't take any shortcuts anymore. Story number 3. My friend and I stopped at some shady truck stop off Interstate 37 going towards Corpus Christi, Texas. He fell asleep as usual, and I'm not gonna lie, I was about to pass out too. I finally decided to pull over and I fell asleep, when a little while later we heard a loud bang on the side of the cab that startled us. We woke up immediately to find this large lizard-like creature with red glowing eyes and sharp-looking teeth staring back at us. No, it wasn't the creature from the movie Jeepers Creepers, and you don't have to believe me, but we both know what we saw that night. It stood there I don't know how many minutes just looking at us. Nothing else. After that, it flew over the cab and took off in the dark of night. Story number 4. During the summer of 2005 and 2006, around 2 a.m. driving back from Rushville, Illinois. About northeast of the town, there's a rural area filled with cornfields and woods. My father was driving and I was in the passenger seat when my dad suddenly taps my shoulder, points out the window, tells me to look. About 300 yards out or so, there's a large object flying a few hundred feet away from the ground, smoothly and constantly passing us. It looked like it had either 1 or 2 levels, rows of lights that went along the side and bright, large rectangle windows with rounded corners spewing out white lights. It made no sound and it flew straight. Did not rotate and had no blinking or flashing lights of any kind, indicating that it could be some sort of small plane or traditional aircraft. It kept flying straight forward and disappeared in the distance. I turned to my dad and we both looked at each other and said, "That was interesting." We proceeded to continue driving home with no further incident. Story number 5. Many years ago, I was on a shift called Meet and Turn. This is where the driver that is domiciled out of the city will drive a load halfway to its destination, while the other driver that meets him halfway and brings the load where it needs to be delivered. I had been doing runs like these for several months, and I found out that I had to meet on point an hour before the other driver arrived. It was a dark and empty lot around 3:30 a.m., so since there was still some time to kill, I decided to close my eyes and take a short nap. About 10 minutes into my nap, I was awakened by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but the bark carried on for several minutes and grew louder and closer. At this point, it became clear that he's either trying to alert me of something, or he's just being a pain in the butt. I sat up and looked out my window, and what I saw left me motionless. Standing there, inches on the other side of the glass, was a man around 35 years of age. He was a large fellow, and he was barking at me. His eyes were crazy, and he was even frothing a little from his mouth. The sheer creepiness struck me, and gently, without making any sudden movements, I reached down and started my truck slowly, started to pull away. As I was doing so, he was chasing after me, much like you would expect an angry dog, and still barking as I kept pulling away. Needless to say, I don't take naps on the job anymore. Story number 6. I used to drive between San Francisco and Cheyenne, Wyoming, a lot of times. It's about a 16 to 20 hour drive depending on the weather. My second time driving that route, I was driving at night, when suddenly my truck starts to make this odd grinding noise. It sounded like I had run over something and it got stuck. It was 2 a.m. I pulled up to a very well-lit rest stop and waked my buddy up, who had been sleeping the whole time. As we both make our way out of the vehicle, I started to explain to him the situation about the grinding noise. When we started to hear what sounded like a child crying, there's not a car in sight beside ours. At the same time, we had heard frequent stories about child trafficking and kidnappings nearby, so we decided to check it out. We grabbed our flashlights and made our way towards the bathrooms, since the noise was coming from there. As we got closer, we realized it was coming from the woman's bathroom, It's a low, dull sobbing, and we were prepared for the worst. We walked in expecting to see someone brutally beaten or worse. We see nothing but only hear the sound. It is still there, but there's no one there. It's completely empty. We turn the lights on and still nothing. We checked each stall just to make sure and nothing. We even looked exactly where the noise was coming from and again, nothing. Is it a hidden camera? A speaker? What the fuck? My buddy sees a small window and opens it, and the noise deceased. We stood there for a few seconds and the window slammed shut on its own. Crying begins again. We were out of the bathroom in seconds as we ran towards the truck, and you could still hear the crying. Of course, the grinding noise is still there. So this time I pull up to another rest stop some miles away, where we checked underneath. We saw some sort of red and silver metal stuck right in there. We couldn't take it out. A few days later, I took it to a mechanic buddy of mine, and he told me that the piece of scrap metal that was stuck was part of a kid's bicycle. I don't know if this is somehow related to our experience, but it was one of those moments for me that I will never forget. My name is Ryan, and this is my true scary story. Now, I never really believed in ghosts or demons before. I mean, yeah, sure, I believe people when they said things, but it's just hard to believe something you've never seen before. When I was 19, I stayed the night at my ex's place on the couch by myself in a house built in the 1920s. Now, my ex had said the house she lived in was haunted and things would move around on their own. That's all I ever really heard from her until I experienced it firsthand. Now, to give you an idea of the room layout, you walk into the house. On the left there are stairs going up, and to the right there is a couch facing away from the stairs. Now, when I'm laying on the couch, you cannot see the stairs, but you can hear when someone comes down them for sure. And that couch is where I was sleeping. One night when I was sleeping peacefully, at about 4 a.m, something woke me up. I heard footsteps walking down the stairs. I simply thought someone was walking down to the living room, but when I looked up, there was no one. I chalked it up to my imagination or something, and then went back to sleep. About a week later, the same thing happened again. I woke up at 4 a.m, and I heard footsteps. But this time I heard whispering. But it wasn't your average whispering. The best way I could describe it would be 10 voices whispering nonsense all at the same time. At this moment, I froze with fear. I felt like I couldn't do anything except throw my blanket over my head and hide. I heard the steps creaking closer and closer to the couch. But then as fast as the voices came, they stopped. I finally gathered up enough courage to look behind the couch and at the stairs. But lo and behold, when I looked, there was nothing there. About another week after the second incident, as I fell asleep, I had convinced myself that what had happened the previous weeks had just been myself dreaming. But I know now I had just been telling myself that just so I'd be able to sleep. I honestly should have just taken the hint. After falling asleep just for a few hours, I had awoken to myself standing at the edge of the couch, looking up the dark stairs. At the top there was a black figure, blacker than black, that struck fear into my heart and soul. It gives me chills just talking about it right now. My eyes are starting to water up. It was like staring into hatred, evilness, and everything that was not good. It was like a cloud of evil. I couldn't move and I couldn't scream. As the apparition moved closer towards me, the stairs creaked. At that moment, I thought it would never end, and I opened my eyes, and I was lying on the couch where I had fallen asleep. But that wasn't the worst part. I opened my eyes and I was frozen. I wasn't able to move, unable to scream, unable to do anything. I can still hear the footsteps coming closer towards the couch from the stairs. Whispering started and got louder and louder, and I can hear the footsteps coming closer. Fear is running through my entire body. Whatever this thing is, was now right behind the couch. Then some sort of black hand reached over and grabbed my shoulder. As soon as this happened, I was able to move again. I didn't care about anything at that point. I screamed and yelled and ran and woke up everybody in the house. As I started talking to the parents and my ex, they told me that their house was haunted, and what I had experienced was experienced by her entire family, and that explains why none of her relatives ever come over to the house to stay the night. I was curious about the history of the house, so I went to the local library to look up the history. It turns out the house was built in the 1920s by one man that lived in it for 30 years until 1950. After that, a couple bought the house, and 1 year later they sold it. And after that, another couple bought it, lived in it for 1 year, and then sold it. This pattern happened 6 or so times, people purchasing the house and then abruptly selling it. On top of all of this, when my ex's parents purchased the home, they found 30 or 40 crucifixes scattered on the walls and on the floors. If that's not a red flag, I don't know what is. But I'll tell you one thing. I didn't believe in ghosts and demons before this moment, but I do now. Story number 2. This is one of the weirdest experiences I've had to date, and I'm still not sure entirely how it happened. I was house sitting for my aunt and uncle a few months ago. I've spent plenty of time in their home before and looked after it alone, and I've never felt anything good, bad, or otherwise. I mentioned to my girlfriend that this time something felt off. The dogs were extremely restless, and I was hearing things that I hadn't heard before. She offered to come stay with me, which I should have known would get interesting, because she tends to attract things. So the evening began quite normally. We watched some Netflix and were chilling in the TV room when we started hearing odd noises. There were very pronounced sounds coming from the living room. We decided to walk into the kitchen, switching on all the lights as we went. We saw nothing. My girlfriend, knowing her stuff, grabs a salt and creates a salt line in front of the door to the TV room. We can still see out of the living room, so she aims her camera phone out there and starts taking pictures. We were astounded to see orbs in most pics, including one very large one that looked as if it was moving at quite a fast pace. Sometime during the evening, things had quieted down. We went off to shop to get smokes. We arrived back to find one of the dogs in visible pain, having injured her leg, and both of them were very agitated. Also, some money that we had left under a heavy cross on the table had been moved. There's no way it could have been blown away or anything. My girlfriend has experience with these things, and even she was a little freaked out. We walked past the passage door and paused to have a look down there. And this is when the freakiest thing of the whole night happened. I was standing next to her, and as we looked down the passage, something unseen rushed at us. She just turned and ran, and I followed her, but I could feel this force behind me until we got past the salt line. We stayed there the rest of the evening. We had a quartz lamp on the whole night and made sure the salt line stayed there. Don't think either of us got any sleep. The rest of the nights I stayed there minus my girlfriend, and everything was fine. No reports of any weirdness from the family either. There is a hospital close by, so I'm not sure if my girlfriend just drew something in from there or what. But she is a bit of a lightning rod for those things paranormal. Can these things be drawn to her even if they don't normally hang around certain places? Usually she attracts things when we go places, but they are often attached to people or the place. But this was neither. Any insights or ideas welcome. Story number 3. This took place 5 years ago when I was in a fraternity. The fraternity house was built sometime in the early mid-1800s, around 1850 I think. It was all white with tall 2-story columns and wood paneling. It was added onto in the 1970s to house the increased number of people living there. Anyway, the original house and property used to be a plantation. It had a rock wall surrounding the lawn. I'm not sure if it was original from the plantation days or added after, but it was in total despair, as if not even a wall anymore, just a line of piled rocks around the place. The house itself had a parlor with a piano in it to the left, a library to the right, and a fireplace in the center facing the library, with a staircase attached when you walked in. There were 5 bedrooms upstairs, and another bedroom and apartment-type area downstairs, near the back of the house, that our house dad lived in, but was probably a servant's quarters originally. We knew for certain that there had been 1 death in the home, and possibly a second. The property owner's son put a shotgun in his mouth and killed himself in the parlor when they still owned the property. This was 90 years before it became a frat house, around 1940. Now that you have some idea what this house looks like, I'll get to the story. It was final weeks at the end of the semester. When anybody had to study, they generally used the library at the front of the house, as it was away from the bedrooms and somewhat quiet. It was a 12-foot by 12-foot room, the walls lined with old smelly yellow-paged books, and it had a round table with 4 chairs in the middle of the room. I was pulling an all-nighter with one other kid, Teddy, and nobody else in the house was awake. Not the original part of the house anyway. I would be able to hear the floors creak, and the walls were thin enough to hear conversations in rooms upstairs from downstairs. I was sitting in the chair with my back to the window and facing the fireplace that you pass when you walk in. The mantle of the fireplace had a few candles on it and maybe a fake plant in the center. Teddy says he's going to get his cigarettes from his dorm room and leaves, so I go back to studying on my own. I look up and I see this 1 candle on the fireplace mantle moving back and forth like a metronome. The base of the candle was firmly planted on the mantle's beam, but the candlestick itself was just moving back and forth. Not like swinging, but it would lean to one side and rest, and then begin to slowly move back over to the other side and repeat. Perplexed, I got up and stood in front of the candle and watched as it did this. The candle was a foot in front of my face. I'm thinking there must be a window open, so I go around the room and check that all the windows and doors are shut, and return to the candle once more. Then I think that it must be rolling around the rim of the candle holder, sort of how you can move a straw around in an empty cup. But it wasn't rolling around the edge. It just went from leaning one side, slowly standing upright, and then leaning to the other side at a 45-degree angle. So I'm standing there just staring at this thing when Teddy comes walking down the hall, asking if I'm ready to smoke. I look at him and then back at the candle. It's upright again and not moving. I asked him if he saw it, and he said he only saw me staring at the mantle as he was coming down the hall. I still haven't found an answer as to how the candle could move like that, but I didn't want to go around talking about it and get made fun of. I did casually ask around if anything has ever happened to anyone else in that house, and I only got 2 answers. The first was that sometimes people heard the piano playing music when no one was in the parlor, and the second was from the president of the fraternity. He was required to stay in the house over winter break to make sure that the heat was on, pipes wouldn't freeze, basic maintenance stuff, etc. He said that after everybody left for winter break, it snowed. Not much, maybe 2 to 3 inches. On his 4th night there on his own, he heard a knock at the front door, which was not common. So he goes to open the door and there's no one there. Except there's footprints in the snow leading up to the door, and no footprints leading away. He said he grabbed his bags and left and didn't go back until the rest of the students started showing up for spring semester. Have you ever been in a position where you found yourself questioning everything you once believed to be true? Perhaps it was something political or religious, or perhaps someone you trusted did something to greatly undermine that trust. Maybe someone close to you turned out to be a monster. When I was in high school, my father began what he referred to as a project in our basement. He He didn't specify what this project was exactly, only that it was strictly for business, and whatever happened down there was to be kept confidential. It would be off limits to everyone but himself. He even went so far as to have the basement walls soundproofed. Admittedly, I found it odd that his job would demand that level of secrecy. Otherwise, I didn't give it too much thought. Some of my friends at school were into all sorts of kinky and bizarre pornography, namely shock videos like 2 Girls, 1 Cup. It wasn't uncommon to spend time on obscene porn sites in order to find such ridiculous bullshit. As for me, I never spent too much time on the internet. Typically, I would just look up NFL or NBA highlights, but not much else. Social media websites never appealed to me, and certainly not at all the weird shit my friends often looked up. One particular day, we were sitting at the lunch table, and my friends were talking about the latest they had seen in the world of strange pornography. As usual, I tuned it out when they brought it up. Then one friend named Kevin began to discuss what he called the dark web, and what he mentioned made all of the kinky stuff seem tame by comparison. Hitman websites, videos of animal torture and mutilation, realistic or possibly even genuine depictions of rape. He claimed he even saw links to child pornography, although he denied clicking on any of them. I admit what I heard actually piqued my interest. Could such a fucked up place truly exist on the internet? Kevin invited us for a sleepover on the weekend, at which point he would show us some of what he was talking about. We all agreed to come over. As he navigated us through the dark web, I saw he was telling the truth. We saw links to every awful thing he had described to us. He stumbled across a random untitled link that stoked up his curiosity. What do you think? Should we check it out? I said nothing, but the rest of the guys all said yes. With that, Kevin clicked the link. The screen changed to show us a clock counting down. Apparently we had stumbled across a live stream. When the clock reached 0, we were greeted by a very dark room. For the first 30 seconds or so, all we could hear was heavy breathing. Eventually a small beam of light appeared, presumably from a flashlight, and illuminated some guy wearing a strange mask, a top hat, a suit, and a cape. His voice was distorted to prevent anyone from recognizing it. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. You may call me Hawkins. And boy, do we have a show for you tonight. A pair of helpless victims. With that, the rest of the screen was illuminated. It was a bright red room, very small and cramped. On the back wall, 2 women were locked up in wall-mounted cuffs. Both were completely nude, one of them obese and the other one very fit. It looked like some stereotypical dungeon in a horror film. As I would soon discover, this was not a movie. Hawkins approached the obese woman. Oh, you are one ugly, disgusting bitch. Ugly bitches like you don't deserve to share the world with the pretty ones. He glanced at the other more attractive woman. Am I right? He asked. She said nothing. I have something special planned for you, but for now we deal with the ugly one. My friends and I all began to feel uneasy about what to expect. Garden shears, Hawkins shouted. A second pair of hands appeared from off-screen and handed the masked man a pair of garden shears, and he slowly crept up to the woman. A pity if only you were better looking. I might not have to do this. Suddenly he opened up the shears and began cutting into the woman's breasts, leading to a deafening scream from her and shocked gasps from me and my friends, one of whom started to vomit. Hawkins went down to her feet and tried to cut them off as well, but found it difficult as she had very thick ankles. No matter, Hawkins said calmly. Chainsaw? The unseen assistant handed him a chainsaw, and my heart sunk. He revved it up and slowly cut into her ankles, leading to more prolonged screaming and tears streaming down her face. The other woman began sobbing in terror as well. Hawkins' mask and costume became drenched in blood. After slicing off her feet, he started cutting into her abdomen, leading to her guts spewing everywhere. One of my friends passed out from the shock and the sight of this. "Let her bleed. But as for you," he said, moving toward the second woman, "whip." After receiving the whip, he walked up to her and gave her a number of brutal lashings. It was at this point when Kevin noticed there was a message box for the live stream, and people were typing all sorts of awful messages, all of them expressing glee at what they were seeing. Kevin typed in his own message. "What the fuck is wrong with you people? The police will hear of this." I saw Hawkins unzip his pants and release the woman from her shackles. But before he could do anything else, his assistant spoke up. "Hey boss, check out this message." Hawkins kicked the woman very hard in the stomach before walking over to the camera. "Oh, a tough guy, eh, Kevin? Gonna call the police on me, huh?" All of us gasped when we heard the crazy masked man mention Kevin's name. "No matter. I have all the information I need on you. Looks like I'll be seeing you soon." A box appeared showing Kevin's name, home address, and school. Kevin was frozen in terror. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to." It was here when Kevin shut off the computer. The rest of our friends bailed, but I chose to stay behind with him, even though I was also frightened out of my mind. Fortunately, nothing happened that night, but Kevin didn't get any sleep at all. A few weeks passed and it seemed what had taken place had blown over. That is until one Friday night. I was watching the local evening news when I heard a report of a mass homicide that had taken place not far from where I lived. I was horrified when I saw a reporter standing outside what I recognized as Kevin's house. Kevin was reported as missing while his parents and siblings were slaughtered. "My God, they got him," I said to myself. During the night, I woke up to use the bathroom. As I walked out, I saw my father coming up the stairs, looking like he had just finished yard work. His clothing was covered in dirt. "Dad, it's 1 a.m. What were you doing?" "I was fixing a busted sprinkler." "At this hour? Why not? Is there some law that says I can't?" "Whatever, Dad," I sighed. I went back to bed and thought nothing of it until the next afternoon. My father had left the house to run some errands. It was here when I decided to be a naughty boy and check out the basement. I don't know why I suddenly decided right then and there to check it out. And I didn't usually have a rebellious streak, but fuck it. I wanted to see what the secrecy was all about. I go down the stairs and flip the light switch. So far, the basement didn't really look all that different from the last time I had set foot down there. Until I looked behind the staircase and noticed something that definitely wasn't there before. A door. I opened the door and a light turned on automatically. What I saw made my blood chill. It was a room with red painted walls and wall-mounted cufflinks. It looked identical to the room I had seen in that awful live stream weeks earlier. In a corner lay blood-stained garden shears and a chainsaw. On the wall next to the door was a desk with a computer and webcam. Next to it was a hideous mask, which I instantly recognized as the mask worn by Hawkins. I heard my father shouting upstairs when he noticed the basement door was open. He came down cursing at me and stopped in his tracks when he saw me standing in the entry of his secret room and holding the mask. His expression changed from anger to shock instantly. We stared at each other in awkward silence for a long time. That was until he broke down sobbing uncontrollably. I walked over and kicked him in the face and gut, then walked upstairs to call the police. My father was arrested shortly thereafter. He had soundproofed the walls to prevent the possibility of anyone's screams from being heard. Also, my friend Kevin and those two women in the live stream were buried in our backyard. Their bodies thoroughly dismembered and laid on top of one another. That explains my dad's late-night yard work. As to why he took the name Hawkins for his dark web identity, Apparently there's a man buried in a nearby cemetery named Carl Hawkins, who was murdered back in 1995. The crime had gone unsolved for nearly 20 years. My father confessed to being his killer, and as it turned out, DNA blood evidence recovered at the scene back then was a match. The name Hawkins stuck with him because you always remember your first murder, as he put it. 5 years have passed since his arrest and sentencing. I haven't paid him one visit in prison since then. Eventually, he will receive the death penalty by lethal injection. I wish I could say I'm saddened by this. He's still my father after all, but I'm not. I can't believe the man who raised me turned out to be such a vile monster. I always believed him to be a principled and honored man. Obviously, this is no longer the case. And now I'm left to wonder whether he passed on some kind of bad seed to me, and whether I too will one day snap and become the same kind of monster. Story number 2. A Reddit user who shared the story that happened to one of his friends in July 2015. His friend is a regular deep web user, and he would buy loads of things like stolen Apple products and drugs. One fine day, like usual, he ordered drugs from the deep web. Not from his usual seller, but a new one. He asked the seller to deliver the drugs in a movie case or something that his mom wouldn't notice. One of his biggest mistakes that he didn't realize until what happened next. The package arrived, but to his surprise, inside it there was a bit of paper that read, "Something has happened. If I were to send it to you, it could be traced back to me, and we would both be caught. Meet me at the elementary school at 7. We will just do it in person." He went there by telling his mom he was staying at his friend's home, and his friend wanted him to take a knife if things went south. He reached the school and noticed a man in a Jeep with plates covered in duct tape. He got down to get the drugs and left in his car after paying him. To his surprise, he could see the man's car following him, till he reached his neighborhood. So to shake him off and leading him to his house, which would be a bad idea, he made some random turns, and when he felt like he lost his tail, he pulled into the garage. But the serious incident happened that night. He could hear the sound of a car engine. 2 men were seated in the same car that followed him. The driver was a drug dealer. The second one had messed up hair, a trashy shirt, and while it was hard to see, my friend could almost make out a scar from a massive burn on the side of his neck. He was watching them from the window, and the second one often looked out the window he was standing, and he lost his cool. Now he didn't care about the consequences, and called the police after moving away from the window. The police asked him to grab a weapon to defend himself. Finally, he could see a figure coming out of his mom's room with a knife in his hand. With full force, he was charging towards him after shutting the door behind him, but he grabbed a pot and hit him on his head. After turning on the light, he noticed it was the second guy from the car, stabbed him in the shoulder with the knife he dropped. Then in a few minutes he could hear the police siren. Both men were arrested. The Reddit user said, "My friend's mom was killed. Her throat had been slit and she had 23 stab wounds, and duct tape covering her mouth." The user was charged with possession of drugs and lost his mom because of his actions. He would never buy drugs from the deep web again. Story number 3. A real deep web story was written by the Persona Fanboy, which was the experience of a deep web user. When he was browsing the deep web on his laptop using Tor, he clicked on one of the nameless hidden wiki links. He came across a website that contained nothing but a picture of a wall. He saw a man wearing a mask emerging from the wall and greeting him. "Hey there." Thinking this was a prank video, I just kept watching. After a while of me just staring at the screen, he began to speak again. "Aren't you going to speak?" he asked. I proceeded to type on the keyboard. "Not the keyboard, speak," he said. At this point I was a bit frightened. "Who are you?" I asked. "I'm your friend," he proceeded to say. At this point, I'm scared. My face is full of terror. I begin to start showing my fright. "Come on, friend. Don't give me that scared face," he said. This is when I got extremely frightened. "Just 1 second, my friend. I will get your address so I can talk to you in real life." He proceeded to type on his computer. Frantic, I tried to close the window down and get out of the video. "That won't work," the man said. Before he had time to track my address, I got a screwdriver, removed the back and battery from my laptop. It's been some time now and he hasn't come. He didn't have enough time to get my address. Or did he?
Against the advice of my parents, I started working at a bikini coffee stand when I was 17 years old, and continued working there until I was 20. If you're unfamiliar with bikini coffee stands, they are little drive-through espresso stands, usually painted in some neon color, where all the employees wear lingerie or bikinis while they serve coffee. I know this sounds strange, and believe me, it is strange. However, the money was good, and it was fun at the time. Not to mention my parents really couldn't afford to pay for college. There is no loudspeaker where customers place their order. They simply drive up to the stand, order coffee, and make small talk as they oogle you in your skimpy ensemble. Within a matter of months, the boss gave me the busiest shift. The shift began at 4 a.m. and ended at 9:30 a.m. Though the coffee stand was not officially open until 4:30. I had to count the till, grind the espresso beans, fill up the sinks, and take stocks, clean if needed, etc. The coffee stand was situated in the corner of a large parking lot, sharing the enormous empty lot with only one other retailer. This retailer didn't even open until around 10 a.m, and so I arrived to the lot when it was completely dark, save for one dim street lamp above the stand, and the other in the far corner of the lot. I pulled up to the stand as I normally did, only this time it was my first shift alone. Normally I worked with one other girl, as the shift would get far too busy for one person. I had a routine with regular customers, as I literally worked every single day, as the boss wouldn't give time off unless requested. While I worked, I would see cars approach the stand, and know immediately which drink to prepare based on my recognition of a regular customer's vehicle. After almost a year on the morning shift, it was rare to see a new vehicle or meet a new customer. My boss was extremely strict about being fast and efficient, and would have us prepare drinks in advance for our regulars whilst they waited in the line of cars. My boss was so strict that for the first 6 months of my working there, he would watch constantly on his camera system and call me on the business phone to scream at me for lack of efficiency. After this, I became so fast at preparing drinks, I decided he guessed he would save money by having me work alone in the very early morning hours. So, like normal, I approached the stand and punched in the access code. I went inside and turned on some music right away to keep myself company. The street lamp directly above the coffee stand had burnt out a few days before, so it was rather dark outside. Coupled with the tinted sliding windows of the coffee stand and the knowledge that I was completely alone, I felt a little creeped out, though not nearly as creeped out and terrified as I would be in a few minutes. Even though the stand was technically open at 4:30, I wouldn't expect my first customer until about 4:45. I usually arrived at 4, but since it was my first shift alone, I came in at 3:30 to give myself enough time to complete all of the opening tasks. My first customer was always Dave. He drove a red sports car and ordered a double cappuccino heavy on the foam. He worked for the local Boeing plant and would brag about his high-ranking job in between awkward remarks about my body. You get used to that sort of thing after a while, but nothing could prepare me for this sort of thing that happened to me on that particular dark morning. Though many of our customers were pervy men like Dave, most of the early morning customers weren't as lecherous as one would expect. They simply needed coffee, and no other businesses were open as early as we. In fact, many of our morning customers were married women in soccer mom vans in desperate need of caffeine. I glanced up at the clock as I counted the money in the till. 3:50 a.m. I finished the count and walked from the back of the stand onto the main floor. There were 2 steps separating the back of the stand from the main floor. The back of the stand had no windows and contained a bathroom, large refrigerator, washer and dryer, etc. This is the area that my co-workers and myself would get ready and joke around where customers couldn't see us. As soon as we walked onto the main floor where customers could see us, uniform was required. Lingerie or bikini as well as heels. That morning I was wearing a matching pink lingerie set with knit stockings. The lingerie fully covered my breasts and buttocks and provided more coverage than a typical bikini that you would see at a beach. I counted all of the syrup bottles. I opened the fridge and took stock inside. I turned on the espresso grinder and robotically poured in a bag of espresso beans. I started filling up the large commercial sink with soapy water, and the music played softly on the stereo. Then I heard it over the noise of the faucet, coffee grinder and the music. I wasn't sure I heard anything at first, so I just ignored it. But then I heard it again. Someone was tapping on the sliding glass window of the stand. I wiped off my wet hands and grabbed my cell phone. 4:15. We weren't open for another 15 minutes. I checked the light switches to make sure I didn't accidentally flip on the open sign. Along with the open sign, the stand was equipped with bright floodlights to illuminate the presence of the stand. Due to the sheer darkness of the morning, I had contemplated turning the floodlights on when I first arrived, but was strictly forbidden from doing so until the stand was open. Without the floodlights on, and through the tinted glass, I could not see who was on the other side. I stood there staring at the window. Maybe it's just Dave, I rationalized to myself. I could hear my heart thumping in my ears. The tapping had definitely grown louder. I picked up the business phone and punched in my boss's number, as he had an extensive camera system complete with night vision, and could see in real time both inside and outside the stand. At the very least, he could tell me who was outside. The phone rang and no answer, so I flipped on the floodlights, walked over to the window, and saw the man, now illuminated by the bright lights. His head was pressed up against the glass, hands cupped around his eyes as he tried to see in. I jumped back. "Hi," he yelled through the glass. "Can I get some coffee?" "We aren't open for another 15 minutes, I'm afraid, and my boss will be mad if I open early." "Oh well, I can wait." The man then walked away from the window and stepped back into a small black Honda. I continued my opening duties, warily eyeing the black Honda. At the time, I felt a false sense of security, lulled into the daily routine of my shift. However, this was different. At 4:30, I dutifully turned on the open sign and watched as the man in the black Honda drove up to the window. He was wearing a dark red baseball cap, a thermal shirt, and plaid pajama pants. I opened the sliding window. "Hi, sorry about that. What can I get for you this morning?" I said, trying to sound as normal as possible. The man looked at me for what felt like an eternity. "What I want doesn't appear to be on the menu," he said, not looking up from my crotch. "Okay, so I know what you're thinking. What did I expect working in this profession? Gentlemen?" I brushed his comment aside with a laugh. "We have a great white chocolate mocha." I looked around frantically. Where the hell was the usual morning guy Dave? I silently prayed another customer would pull up behind this guy. He looked away and stared at his steering wheel. "I want you to be my maid." "Excuse me?" I said, not sure if I heard him correctly. "I want you to be my maid. I want you to come over to my house wearing a maid costume with nothing underneath." I want to watch you, and if you don't clean correctly, I'm going to do whatever I want to you." He paused and gripped his steering wheel tightly. "I am not a nice guy." He looked up at me and smiled. Until that point in my life, I had never seen a truly sinister smile before. I slammed the long service window shut, ran to the back of the stand, hyperventilating at this point. I picked up the phone and called my boss repeatedly, with no answer, and I stood on the steps and peered out the window. The black Honda was gone, replaced with the familiar red of Dave's sports car. I never thought I would be happy to see pervy Dave, but here I was rushing to the service window to tell him what happened. I opened the window, all the while frantically relaying the story. Dave just laughed and muttered something about the guy dreaming. He told me I was being paranoid and the guy just had no filter. For some reason, this put me at ease. Dave reached his hand out the window to place a $5 bill in my tip jar. He tipped this amount each morning. "Wow," he exclaimed. "You just opened and your tip jar is already full. I know you make coffee, but it's not that great." "Huh?" I said, slamming the register shut. The tip jar rested on the outside window ledge, so customers could reach it. I had made a habit of leaving it outside in between customers, as it could get very busy. I leaned over and looked into the metal canister. Inside the tip jar was a long white envelope that appeared to be stuffed into its capacity. My stomach turned, as I knew it would be from the guy in the black Honda. "Dave," I said cautiously, "it's from the guy I just told you about. I'm not opening that." Dave sipped his cappuccino and suddenly his goofy demeanor turned serious. "You're right. Let me open it. I have gloves." It was late fall and rather cold. Dave put on his gloves in a dramatic manner, laughed about my paranoia, and proceeded to step out of his car, and he took the envelope out of the tip jar and opened it. "Holy shit," he said, his eyes widening. He held up a stack of $20 bills held together by a rubber band. On the back of the stack was a folded up piece of paper. He unfolded the paper and began reading it. His eyes grew wilder. His hands were shaking ever so slightly. What does it say?" He simply said, "Get dressed and call the police." I snatched the note from him, his jaw slightly agape. The note was laden with spelling errors and looked like it had been written by a child. Oddly, there were rather long words that were attempted but spelt incorrectly. It said some very deranged things. There are some things too sick to mention here, but I will relay the basic message as best I can recall. Some things you just never forget, even if you want to. "You will come to my house. When you arrive, I will examine you thoroughly. And I will tie you to the post, and you will be punished for what you do. Every inch of your body will be bruised and sore. Afterwards, I will untie you and use you in every way possible." Just to mention, he used a different term, but it is extremely graphic and includes the word hogtied. "You can scream, but no one will hear you. This is your first payment. Upon reading this note and taking this money, you have agreed to follow through. If you do not follow through, you are stealing, and you will be punished more severely than if you cooperated to this initial agreement. You will clean every inch of my house. There will be no more mistakes, or more punishment will follow." I got dressed and called the police and my boss, who finally answered. The police arrived, and I went to the station to explain in detail what happened. I handed them the note along with the money for evidence. The female police officer nonchalantly told me I should probably quit my job, that this behavior was to be expected from their customers, and I told them that I had never experienced anything like this before. My boss reviewed the outside videotape footage, and the footage showed the man standing outside the coffee stand, just staring inside. Occasionally it showed him leaning his head into the glass and cupping his hands around his eyes for better view. It also showed him rubbing his crotch. Apparently he'd been standing outside since 3:40, 10 minutes after my initial arrival. At one point, it showed him going back into his car to re-emerge several minutes later and finally tap on the window. I was shocked to realize that the man had watched me for almost a full hour without my knowledge. I felt stupid, but most of all scared. The footage also revealed that the man had his license plate covered with what appeared to be white paper. After reviewing the footage and the note, the police decided the man posed a potential threat, and that his behaviour was not normal. They sent an undercover cop back in the stand with me. I was shocked that they wanted me to go right back into work not even 2 hours after the incident. The cop sat outside in an SUV whilst I worked. The plan was this: if the man drove through again, I was to flick the open sign on and off to alert him of the man's presence. I worked serving all of my regular customers, trying my best to pretend nothing happened. I was told not to recall the incident to any one of my co-workers or customers that morning, in case they knew the man and warned him of police involvement. The man did not return that day, but he did return. Little did I know this would be the beginning of a year-long nightmare. The stalking continued for a while, roughly a year. The stalker left endless creepy gifts for me both at work and at my place of residence, all of which he signed off on as Turner. It got to the point where I couldn't prove it was him, because it would often be sent by a courier or a third party. He continued to come to the stand, and at one point he even promised to leave me alone. My co-worker was there, and we actually managed to have a very brief discussion in which he apologised and agreed that his behaviour was inappropriate. However, he resumed just days later. The police were of no help, and kept insisting that it would all go away if I just quit my job. I had his license plates, and he was out of state, and vehicle description, but apparently the car wasn't even registered. Despite taking a leave of absence, the stalking continued. I didn't want to quit my job, as this was shortly after the recession. My mum, a sole provider for a family of 5, had lost her job, so I wanted to chip in and help her so that we wouldn't lose the house. Other bikini stands in the area were not hiring, due to being embroiled in prostitution scandals, all of which were heavily covered by the national media. You have no idea how hard it was, and maybe still is, to get a normal job after having worked as a bikini barista. Employers don't like it on your history all that much. The few of the scariest experiences included being assaulted at an ice freezer outside the coffee stand. Thankfully he didn't physically harm me, just grabbed and touched me inappropriately. Turner coming through the drive-thru completely naked and jacking off in a pair of women's underwear. Another incident occurred when my friend gave me a joint a customer had left me on her shift. Crazy it may sound, my regulars often left joints in my tip bar instead of money, as I liked to smoke a lot at the time. I asked my co-worker the customer's name, but she didn't get a chance to ask for it. I was told by my friend/co-worker that he had long hair and looked like a hippie, and this fit the description of a customer who would regularly leave joints in my tip jar. I smoked the joint before I went to sleep one night, only to have a massive freak-out full of hallucinations and hysteria. I thought I saw ghosts, demons and fire, and I ended up in the hospital. I found out in the hospital that, in addition to having marijuana in my system, I also had a bunch of PCP. Later on, Turner would take credit for this joint by sending a text to my phone, letting me know that if I wanted him to smoke me out, that we could get together sometime. I guess he thought that this weed was enjoyable. Of course, I gave his number to the police. I feel like I gave them enough information to get this guy. But I was never taken seriously, or they had bigger fish to fry. They did find out, however, that the phone he used was a burner. In this period of time, it was evident that one of my co-workers was sharing my personal information with Turner in exchange for money, or maybe just because she didn't like me. This co-worker was later arrested on prostitution charges, and I ended up relocating and changing my last name, which is surprisingly easy to do. I did this primarily to get away from Turner, but also so that I could get a fresh start with new employment history, and get away from the negative energy that had encircled my life. I had taken nude photos of myself and my boyfriend at the time, and after we broke up, he had leaked them to everyone on my contacts list, including my co-workers, and of course, This meant Turner most likely got a hold of the photos as well. It may seem strange to you, but after a while the stalking becomes part of your life. It's kind of like living around a bunch of rattlesnakes. You may feel constantly on guard and on edge, but eventually, you work your daily routine around trying your best to avoid the snakes so that you don't get bitten. When it happens, you do your best to move on. I've recently found out, within the last few months, that a man fitting my stalker's description was incarcerated some time ago for doing something even more frightening to another barista in the Pacific Northwest. There was also similar incidences and reports of a man driving through bikini stands naked, or with women's underwear. I suspect this man was most likely Turner. I cannot be sure it's the same person, as I never was able to find out this person's true first or last name, but I am hopeful that it's him, and that he will be locked away for a very long time.
This happened several years ago, when I was a naive 19-year-old university student. A bus company had just returned from being on strike, and as a special promotion were letting people ride free for 2 weeks. I saw myself as adventurous and took this as an invitation to go randomly riding all over the city. One of my little adventures was a bit scary. I was at a bus stop in some random, unfamiliar part of the city. A man was next to me. We were the only ones there. I like to be nice to strangers and so engaged in conversation. Things escalated quickly. The man started telling me that he was some sort of crime boss, and that he was aiming to kill a certain person. He said something along the lines of, "I don't like when I have to kill people, but when they cause trouble, sometimes I gotta do what I gotta do." I was afraid he would hurt me if I upset him, so I politely nodded along, as though what he was saying was completely ordinary. Lucky for me, his bus soon arrived. He got on Route 2 to a place called Pleasantville. To this day, I don't know if he was a legitimate gang member or just delusional. I'm not sure what part of the city I was in, nor do I know if he killed his intended target or anybody else. But to this day, I avoid Route 2 to Pleasantville. So like one person before me said, they never thought about their bus driver until someone wrote about it. Well, the same thing happened to me. The thing is that this bus driver wasn't a school driver, rather an inner city bus driver, if that makes sense. So I was going to math instructions when I was 16, and they were in a different part of town. It would take me an hour by foot to get back to my apartment, so instead I opted for a 15-minute bus ride. I had been taking buses to my math instructor for a few times now, so I knew that the bus I was supposed to take was a 14. However, this particular day, I missed the 14 and got on to 14B. The 14B takes a detour as it is covering a portion of the outside city area. I didn't know that. I wanted to ask him where the bus would be going, but he seemed to be in a rush and just signaled me to climb in and stop asking. There was no one behind me, so I could have easily hopped off, but I was in a bit of a hurry, so I unfortunately got on and sat in the middle. I noticed immediately that the bus didn't take a turn for the city center, but rather for the hills, which I never even knew existed. So the bus is slowly getting empty, and I'm listening to my music, but I noticed the driver's occasional glances in the mirror towards me. We made eye contact a few times. I'm slowly panicking because I've never been to that place before, and I could literally see my whole town from the hilltop. My worst fear at that moment realizes when the last passenger leaves the bus. Now only him and I were left, and he turns around and asks me where I'm headed. I explained to him that I need to get off at the first station in my part of the town, and he grins kind of wickedly. I was panicking, my social anxiety over the roof, and this guy, who is about 40 to 50 years old or so, tells me to go and sit right behind him. I hesitated and he said, "Go on." I somehow scrambled out of my seat and sat behind him, and he started driving again. He kept saying something even as other passengers boarded, but I can't remember what exactly. I only remember him promising me someone would be waiting for me at the station. At that point, I say I could exit on a different station, to which he replies with, "I'd rather you leave on that one." He finally gets to my station and I bolt out of it, not looking behind me. I later told the story to my best friend who lives in the area, and she told me he was always like that, and that I should definitely avoid ever getting on that bus again. So creepy old bus driver, let's never meet again. Here is something that happened to me 3 years ago, and sticks with me, especially when I'm out at night. I was on my way back home from a late night gym session. The gym is right next to my campus, but my flat was on the complete other side of the city, so I was definitely making sure that I caught one of the last buses. Otherwise, it was a long, long walk back. I got to the bus stop, and it was empty except for one older guy who looked pretty disheveled and out of it. Already this was setting off alarm bells in my mind, so I stood far away from him and began to wait. The bus tracker said that the next bus wouldn't be here for another 15 minutes. Damn it. Oh well, I put my headphones in and started listening to one of my podcasts to pass the time, so I definitely wasn't making sure that I got caught on the last bus. Otherwise, it was a long, long walk back. It should be noted at this point that I have dwarfism. I'm 4 foot nothing and about 80 pounds, and I'm used to unwanted attention. It was against my better judgment that I was even on this late, by myself in an unfamiliar part of town. I must have let my guard slip because I suddenly felt a hand on my shoulder, and the man was standing right next to me. Too close. I looked up at him and he was saying something to me, so I took my headphones out to hear him. You all right there, pal? I was saying I've never seen one of you before. He was swaying and grinning at me. I'm all right, thanks. What bus are you getting? I did not want to answer that truthfully, but there were only 2 buses left to come that night. I said it was the other one. He looked disappointed. I've always wanted to meet one of you. He stood there and stared at me for what felt like a whole minute. I felt his eyes all over me. Now I think I understand what women mean when they say they felt like a piece of meat. Eventually he said, "Do you have sex?" I've had some inappropriate questions from strangers before, but that took the biscuit. I should have said it was none of his business, but I found myself saying, yes, uncomfortably. He seemed to contemplate that for a while, amused by the idea. What's it like down there? I've always wanted to know. From his tone, he sounded excited. I took a couple steps away from him. This time I was more prepared. That's not really any of your business, is it? I was thinking about how long the walk would be back home. He was getting the bus I needed. I didn't know where the other bus went. Was it worth going through with my lie? I didn't know. I suspected that he would get on the same bus as me regardless. He took another step closer. This was the moment I actually got scared. He saw me step backwards and didn't care. He knew I was uncomfortable and didn't care. That means it's big, he laughed. I bet it does. I've always wanted to have sex with a midget. That was it. I wish I would have said screw off or leave me alone or something, but I was just too scared. I need to go, I blurted and walked as briskly as I could without running. It would take him no effort at all to catch up with me. I pictured him walking behind me with his much longer legs, but I didn't want to look. I walked for a couple minutes before I finally glanced back. He was still at the bus stop, but he had moved about 10 feet to stand at the edge of it. I could only see his silhouette against the light of the bus stop, but I could tell he was watching me. I turned around a corner street just to get out of sight. I walked the full hour and a half home, picturing him following me the whole way. Creeps me out to this day. During university, I had a whole slew of creepy encounters. This has stuck with me the most. It started during my first class. One day a group of us were walking together along campus, and slowly members began branching off. It ended up as just myself and a guy who I was not inclined to befriend. Only knew his name, but I didn't want to be rude and not keep walking along with him. He asked me where I'm going, and I tell him I normally take a nap between classes and was going into my dorm. He asks if he can see my suite. Normally this would be a no-brainer red flag, but my particular building was renowned for being fancy, and others frequently asked to see inside of it. I say sure, not wanting to be mean and thinking this guy will take a quick look around and give the typical jealous comments and then leave. We go inside and I show him the basics, doing so in a way that we ended up back at the entrance of the suite. This whole time he's not saying much, and I'm only announcing things dryly, so I was confident when I said a quick, "It's pretty nice, see you around," that he was going to take to leave. I turned around and went to my room. I did not show him any rooms or say where anyone stayed. A few moments later, as I'm sitting my stuff down, I turn around, and there he is in the doorway. He's silent. I did not say anything because I did not want to invite him in. I wanted him to go. I just look at him, then start picking up stuff and moving it around, trying to look busy. He slowly walks a couple steps into the room and asks, "Have you done the coursework yet?" I told him no. By this time I assume he is trying to hang out, and tell him again that I'm planning on napping. He doesn't even skip a beat and says, "That's okay. I can watch you sleep and help you with it after." A smile, no tone, then silence again. I immediately tell him he needs to leave and follow him until he's gone out the locking doors, and I know he can't follow me back in. I told a lot of our friends about this, and they were heavily creeped out and made a point not to leave us alone again, ever. We finished the year out and I haven't thought about this guy in a long time. I did not know anything about him at all, and I still only knew his name. Flash forward a year and some change to the next summer, when I'm taking a bus ride home from a different part of campus. We get to one of the points where the bus stops and waits until a certain time before it can leave again, and everyone else that had been on the bus gets off at this stop. At this point, the driver starts talking to me, asking a lot of questions. I did not think anything weird at first, and answered what I thought were idle chat questions. So which apartments are you in? And what classes are you taking? Then, as more and more questions just kept coming, I started to feel uneasy with his mannerisms and became extremely vague in my answers. I still don't know if he was always intending to tell me this, but when he stopped peppering me with questions, he began spilling a story of how his son was in my math classes the previous year, and he knew all about me. He then started giving me a lot of family details. It's at this point that I realized his son is the guy who wanted to watch me sleep. All the details fit, but I had to know for sure, so I asked if his son is called Name. He smiles yes. He then mentioned how he would like to start riding bikes with me, and would I ride bikes with him and his son. I was gathering my stuff by this point and had decided to get off the bus. There are 2 doors, one at the front and one halfway, which was closest to me. The door stays open while the bus is at these stops, so people can hop off and on, and the driver normally gets off and takes a break. As I'm getting my stuff and getting up, the halfway door is shut. I look again at the driver, an older man but much larger than my petite frame and build. He is now standing facing me, but the front door is still open. He asks again, "Will you ride bikes with us?" I want off the bus and think the only way is to pacify him. I say yes, and make my way to the front door, not knowing how to get around him. He looks pleased but asks where I'm going. I try and tell him I've decided to walk home, but he still blocks my way and tries to talk me out of it. I'm firm in that I want to walk from here, but he will not move. I'm standing in front of him wishing to move, but my body is frozen in place. Slowly he decides, "Give me your number and then I'll let you go." I really don't want to do this, but I also want off this bus immediately. My first thought is to give a fake, but I'm so glad I didn't as he immediately dialed the number. It was a test. Seeing my phone ring and watching me save his contact, he moves enough that I slide by and make it off the bus. After making it home, I go to block his number and already have multiple missed calls and a voicemail of him just breathing. The situation was reported, and I did not see him on a route for a long time. But around a year later, I was getting on another bus and noticed he was back. I've never covered my face and backed off of public transit faster. Let's never meet again, father or son. I am female. When I was 10 years old, my family relocated from Delaware to South Carolina for my dad's job. We lived near all of our family and had never moved before. One of Dad's selling points about the move was that people in the South are so friendly. I just finished 5th grade and would be starting 6th in South Carolina. I rode the bus to and from school in Delaware, and so there wasn't a lot of anxiety about riding the bus after we moved. 6th grade started and I was excited about my new school and loved my teacher. Dad was right. People in the South are polite and friendly. Well, most of them are. Anyway, one day in the fall I got off the bus at my stop after school, and a man in a dark green VW Beetle was behind the bus, pulled off the main road, and called out to me as I was walking towards my house. I turned around and probably even smiled at him. I had no real stranger danger fears at that time. I walked up to the driver's side of his car to see what he wanted. I figured he wanted to ask for directions or something, and I planned to tell him I just moved here and didn't know, but oh boy, he didn't need directions. He was after something entirely different. He smiled at me and said something I didn't catch, comprehend, or understand. So I said, "What?" or "Excuse me?" to get him to repeat it. I got a little closer so I could hear him better, and he said, "Do you want to have sex?" So at that time I didn't know what that meant, except that maybe I kind of did, and knew that it was a bad word. I didn't know what to do, whatever that meant. I turned and ran to my neighbor's house and didn't look back. I was crying and they called my mom and my parents came, and my parents called the police about it. A couple of days later, the police department had a sketch artist come meet my parents and I at the station to work with me. I did the best I could, but honestly, I wasn't studying the man's features or even trying to remember his face at the time of the incident, so I don't know how accurate it actually was. My parents and I thought that was the end of it. Nobody really thought they would find him. The cops were saying things like if they found him, he would go to jail for a while, for his obscene question to me. My mom was nervous that if it came to that, I would have to go to court and testify, and she didn't feel good about putting me through that. She was worried that even as an underdeveloped 10-year-old child, the defense would attempt to shame me in some way, or say I was asking for it. About a week later, I was getting off the bus and I hear a car horn beep. I looked to see it and it was the same guy, same VW Beetle, smiling and waving at me. I was stunned. I blankly waved back for some reason, but at the same time memorized his tag number. I repeated it to myself over and over as I ran to my house to write it down and call Mom. Cops were notified and the guy was identified. He lived 20 minutes away in another town. His local cops knew and were friendly with his family. The good old boy system. So he didn't go to jail, but apparently they told him to stay away from me. I never saw him again and I hope I never do. I wonder how many times he might have followed the bus and watched me that I never even knew about. Dear pedo pervert predator, let's never meet again. This happened last night as I was coming home from work. I'm a 23-year-old woman and I don't have a driver's license, so I take public transport or Uber a lot. I've had several people give me general bad vibes and make me feel unsafe. But this is the first time somebody has crossed the line from creepy to scary with me on my commute. I stayed a little later than usual at work yesterday because I'm trying to learn After Effects and I wanted to spend a little more time on the practice project I had going. I left the office around 5:45 and walked 10 minutes to the bus stop. The sun was going down, but there was still light in the sky. I didn't have to wait long for the bus. The driver pulled up and was very friendly as she scanned my ticket, which is on my phone. I took one of the seats that faces the inside aisle, which I prefer not to do, but it was the only place to sit where I didn't have to sit directly next to somebody who was already on the bus. Because, I value personal space. After a few stops, we made a stop near the major university in my city. A young guy got on, probably younger than me, but not by much, and sat directly next to me. He smelled awful, but not as bad as some people I've encountered on the bus, so I didn't think to move or anything. Right away, he made a sound like, "Ha!" and I thought he was going to comment on the music in my headphones, but he didn't. He looked at my phone. "Are you on Facebook?" "I'm on Twitter." Never understood it. "You ever sold anything on Facebook?" I said no. He kept asking me weird questions like that, like he just wanted to talk to me and he didn't care what it was about. At this point, I figured he was trying to flirt and was just bad at it. So I politely answered his questions and tried not to be too friendly about it. He asked if I was a student, which I'm not, and whether I would rather live in a mansion or an apartment. Obviously a mansion, I told him. He said his goal was to have a house big enough to put a skate park in. That's a good goal, I said, thinking that this guy was probably not playing with a full deck, but not wanting to be an asshole about it. He said, "You're awesome." And he asked me, "Are you looking for a best friend?" I said no, that I have a best friend. We've known each other since we were 8 years old. And then, like it was so casual, he said, "And we've known each other since we were 8 years old." And then, like it was so casual, he said, "If you tell me where he lives, I could kill him." I didn't know what to say. I looked around for someone on the bus to intervene, but no one had heard what he said. So I just said, probably not." He laughed. "You smell good." I just put my headphones back on and tried to tune him out. There were no available seats for a couple of stops, so I just had to sit there with him talking in my ear. I couldn't hear him. I was listening to Pedro Fernandez as loud as I could. As soon as the seat opened up, I moved away from him to forward-facing seat and put my purse next to me in a defensive position. I started to get worried about whether this guy would get off the bus before I did. My destination was pretty far down the line, but I didn't need him following me home or even knowing where I usually get off the bus. What would have stopped him from waiting for me? I texted my roommate to pick me up at the Hooters halfway home. Right as I did this, he got off downtown. And lucky for me because my roommate was busy and couldn't pick me up. Also, my childhood best friend is a girl. I wasn't about to tell him that, though. So creepy guy who wants to kill my best friend, take a different bus next time. Back when I was 15, I picked up my younger brother from elementary school every day, and we would bus home together. We had to transfer 2 times, and this happened at the same stop at the second transfer. One day I saw an old Caucasian man get onto the bus after us. He looked around 60 years old with white hair, and he was really large. Since there was no seats available, I stood up to offer my seat to him. He gave me a smile and thanked me. I thought nothing of it. After a few minutes, I noticed that he was still staring at me with a smile, and at that time I thought he was just appreciating the fact that I gave up my seat for him. After another while, I just started to get uncomfortable because I was noticing that maybe he had mental health issues or he was just slow because of his age. I took my brother by the hand and we moved back towards the back of the bus. By the time our stop arrived, the bus was pretty empty. My brother and I exited and we started walking in the direction of our apartment, which was only a few feet away from the bus stop. I was pretty paranoid from earlier, so I turned around to check if anyone had followed us off the bus. I saw the old man walking in our direction, and I internally panicked. I reasoned to myself that maybe he lived in this area as well, and it was just a coincidence that he was walking in this direction. So I kept walking towards the gate of my apartment. My brother and I got to the gate, and I was digging in my backpack for my keys. Suddenly I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I looked up to see the old man smiling at me. I didn't know how to react, so I just said hello, and kept looking for my keys while I kept my eyes on him. By that time I was really creeped out, because his stare was so intense. He said thanks for giving your seat for me, and asked if I was free to go for lunch with him, so he could really thank me. In my head, all I could think was that it was around 4 o'clock. So why would he want to go to lunch? I quickly declined, shoved my brother past the gate and slammed it behind me. The old man just kept smiling and staring as I looked back, and I was glad that I was able to escape from him. A few days passed and I thought nothing more than the incident. Then one day I saw him again at the bus stop. I tried to stand as far away as possible and tried not to look in that direction. I could feel him staring at me, and I remember just wishing that that bus would come faster so I could get away. We got onto the bus and I could still see him smiling as he stared at me, unblinkingly out of the corner of my eye. I tried to keep my attention on the book that I was reading and not let it bother me. When our stop came, my brother and I quickly got off the bus and sped walked to the gate. I turned around to check if the old man had followed us off the bus, and was immensely relieved that he didn't. I looked at the bus as it drove past, and I remember seeing him by the window seat, just staring at me. For the next few weeks, he just kept showing up at the same bus stop. Sometimes I would see him sitting by a ledge, and when he saw us, he would get in line for the bus. Sometimes he tries to go up to me and initiate conversation. I always ignored him the best I could, and keep my brother on the opposite side of him with me in between. I was immensely glad that I lived in an apartment so he didn't know where we exactly lived. I never told my parents about it, and although I contemplated telling someone, I never did. Plus, there wouldn't be any evidence. I also thought that because he was an old man, he couldn't do much harm. Maybe he was just lonely. I just tried to put up with it the best I could, and stay as far away as possible from him. I also couldn't take another bus because the bus didn't come often, and we had to go to extracurricular activities afterwards. Then one day he initiated conversation again and started telling me that he was a rich man. He showed me the gold chain around his neck and the gold rings around his finger. I was mildly offended that he thought this would make me want to talk to him, so my brother and I went to a nearby supermarket to try to avoid him and take the next bus. I thought that he would give up and just take the bus, so I wouldn't see him when I went back, except he followed us into the supermarket. I walked through a few aisles to try and lose him. After I couldn't see him anymore, I decided to buy my brother a treat to calm him down. We headed back to the cashier's area and lined up. Then I felt a tap on my shoulder and I saw the old man with a $20 bill in his hand. He offered to pay and I said no thank you. I think he said okay and just walked out. I didn't see him afterwards at the bus stop and thought that maybe he took the hint I wasn't interested in anything to do with him. Luckily, this happened a month or two before summer break, so I didn't have to take that bus route anymore. I also didn't have to go to extracurricular activities, so my brother and I took a bus at a different time. Fast forward a year, I was walking my brother to summer school every day during the summer. On that route, we walked past a subway stop. One day we saw the old man at the stop. We quickly walked away hoping that he didn't see us, but he must have seen us, because every day after that, he was sitting outside the subway stop. He didn't try to initiate conversation, but he was always staring intensely at me from afar. I started getting nightmares of him kidnapping me or taking a knife to threaten me. After a week or so, my brother and I just took a different route to school. I didn't see him again until last year. I saw him at the bus stop on my way to university, and my heart automatically started beating faster, and my hands became clammy. He must have seen me because he smiled and stared at me without blinking. Luckily, since my classes aren't a set schedule, he wasn't able to lurk at the bus stop again waiting for me. I still see him on rare occasion at bus stops around where I live. But for the sake of my sanity, old man, let's not meet again.